Snoop Dogg entered a luxury boutique to buy a gift, but what followed was a jaw-dropping display of prejudice that left everyone stunned. You won't believe how it ends. Like, comment, and subscribe for the full story that's more than just a shopping trip. Snoop Dogg walked into the upscale glamour boutique in the heart of Beverly Hills to buy a birthday gift for his wife. He had chosen this store because he'd heard it offered distinctive high-end products. The white marble floors gleamed under the pendant lights, and the air was rich with the scent of expensive perfume. Snoop paused for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the bright interior. He wasn't a regular in places like this. As a rapper, his daily attire was more street than suit, but today he wore his sharpest blazer and a pair of shoes polished to perfection. He was determined to find the perfect gift for his wife, something that showed how much he appreciated her standing by him during the tough times. The entrance bell jingled softly as the door closed behind him. Mr. Harrison had decided to drop by unexpectedly to check on how the store was managing before his meeting nearby. The boutique wasn't busy, just a couple browsing near the glass jewelry case and a woman studying scarves. Behind the counter stood the store manager, a woman in her late 40s with platinum blonde hair wearing a tailored suit that screamed authority. She glanced up from her phone, locking eyes with Snoop for a split second before her gaze drifted to his shoes, then his hands, then his face again. Her expression hardened almost imperceptibly, but Snoop noticed. He'd seen that look before. "Good afternoon," Snoop said, his voice cool but steady. "I'm looking for a gift for my wife. It's her birthday soon?" The manager, now named Ms. Sinclair, tilted her head slightly, her lips pressed into a tight line. She didn't respond immediately, her eyes scanning him as if assessing whether he belonged there. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked finally, her tone clipped. Snoop blinked, taken aback. "An appointment? No, I wasn't aware I needed one." Her eyebrows arched slightly, her tone now more patronizing than before. "We typically work with clients by appointment. It's more efficient that way." Snoop kept his composure, though the words stung. "I see. Well, I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to browse for something special." She hesitated, then gestured vaguely toward the far end of the store. "Fine, but we're a high-end boutique. Prices might not be what you're used to." Snoop felt the words like a slap. He took a deep breath, his hands tightening slightly before he forced them to relax. "I'm aware. Thank you," he replied, keeping his tone steady as he moved toward the jewelry case. He could feel her watching him, her presence like a shadow, hovering just out of reach but impossible to ignore. The couple by the jewelry case glanced at him, exchanging a look he couldn't quite decipher before returning to their browsing. He tried to focus on the items on display, delicate gold necklaces, diamond-studded earrings, intricate bracelets, but her footsteps echoed behind him as she followed at a distance. It was clear she wasn't there to help. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" she asked suddenly, her voice closer than he expected. "Yes," Snoop replied, turning to face her. "A bracelet? Something elegant but not too flashy. My wife has a simple style." Sinclair tilted her head, her smile thin and insincere. "I see. Well, we have some lovely options, but perhaps you'd prefer to check out our lower-tier collection online. It might be more suitable." Snoop stared at her, stunned by her audacity. He opened his mouth to respond, but stopped himself. A part of him wanted to call her out, but another part, tired of these microaggressions, wanted to avoid making a scene. Instead, he said, "I'd still like to see what you have here." Her smile didn't waver, but the tension in her posture was unmistakable. She pulled out a tray of bracelets, setting it on the counter with deliberate slowness that felt almost mocking. Snoop leaned closer to examine them, his mind racing as he tried to focus on the task at hand, but the tension in the air was only beginning to build. What happened next would set everything in motion. Snoop carefully examined the bracelets laid out before him, each piece sparkling under the lights, but he couldn't shake the sensation of being under a microscope. Miss Sinclair stood rigidly behind the counter, her arms crossed, eyes flickering between him and the door. Her posture screamed impatience, as though she were just waiting for him to leave. "This one's beautiful," Snoop said, pointing to a slender gold bracelet with a small emerald at its center. "Can I see it up close?" She hesitated, then reluctantly picked up the bracelet with gloved hands, her movements deliberate and overly cautious, as if he might snatch it and run. "This piece is quite exclusive," she said, her voice tinged with condescension. "It's from a designer collection, very high-end." Snoop nodded. "That's fine. May I hold it?" Another pause. Her fingers hovered over the bracelet for a moment before she finally handed it to him. Snoop turned it over gently, admiring the craftsmanship. He imagined it on his wife's wrist, the way her face would light up when she saw it. The thought brought a small smile to his face, but Ms. Sinclair's sharp tone snapped him out of his thoughts. "Are you sure this is in your price range?" Snoop's heart sank, though he didn't let it show. "I'll let you know once I decide," he replied evenly, placing the bracelet back on the counter. His calm response seemed to irritate her even more. "You know," she said, leaning in slightly, "we don't usually allow people to browse for too long. It disrupts the flow for our regular clients." Snoop straightened, meeting her gaze. "I wasn't aware my presence was disruptive. I'm just here to shop like anyone else." "Ms.?" Sinclair's smile thinned further, her voice dropping as if to make sure no one else could hear. "It's not personal, sir. It's just policy." Snoop took a slow breath, trying to stay composed. He glanced around the store, noting how the other customers were left alone to browse at their leisure. No policy was being enforced on them. Before he could respond, Miss Sinclair's voice rose slightly. "Actually, I think we're going to have to ask you to leave. I don't think we have anything suitable for you." The words hit him like a slap. He felt the heat rising in his chest, the humiliation creeping into his thoughts. "I haven't done anything wrong," Snoop said firmly. "I'm just shopping for my wife. Is there a problem, Miss?" Sinclair's tone grew icy. "Sir, I don't want to escalate this, but if you don't leave now, I'll have to call security." Snoop's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to remain calm. He wasn't about to let her force him out without standing his ground. "Call them," he said quietly, his voice steady. "I haven't done anything wrong and I'm not leaving." The other customers had started to notice the tension. One of them whispered something to the other, glancing nervously at Snoop. The couple by the jewelry case moved a few steps away, as though they didn't want to be involved. "Miss..." Sinclair didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone, dialing a number with exaggerated motions. "I need security at the boutique," she said loudly, her words designed to attract attention. "We have a situation here." Snoop's stomach churned, but he held his ground. He wouldn't let her strip away his dignity. As the minutes stretched on and the weight of the situation settled over the room, someone unexpected was about to change everything. Snoop stood firm, his hands resting calmly on the counter, though his insides felt like a storm brewing. The store manager's loud call for security had drawn the attention of everyone in the boutique. Whispers filled the air as customers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what was happening but eager to distance themselves from it. A uniformed security guard arrived moments later, his boots thudding heavily against the marble floor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had the air of someone who'd seen far too many petty disputes. His eyes darted to Snoop, then to Ms. Sinclair, as if already piecing together the narrative she wanted him to believe. "Ma'am, what seems to be the problem here?" the guard asked, his voice steady but firm. "Miss..." Sinclair wasted no time. "This man," she said, pointing at Snoop, "is refusing to leave after I've asked him multiple times. He's making the staff and customers uncomfortable." Snoop couldn't stay silent any longer. "Uncomfortable?" he asked, his voice measured but firm. "I came in to buy a gift for my wife. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't caused any trouble. The only discomfort here seems to be your assumption that I don't belong." The guard hesitated, caught between Mrs. Sinclair's accusations and Snoop's calm defense. "Sir, I just need to make sure there's no issue here," he said, his tone neutral but cautious. Snoop spread his arms slightly, making it clear he had nothing to hide. "There's no issue other than being treated unfairly for no reason. I just wanted to buy a bracelet." Ms. Sinclair scoffed loudly as if his words were ludicrous. "He's clearly not here to buy anything. He's been loitering, and I won't allow this store to be used for some kind of spectacle." Snoop felt the heat rising in his chest again. "Loitering?" he repeated, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You followed me from the moment I walked in. You've questioned everything I've done. What exactly have I done to make you think I don't belong here?" The guard's brow furrowed, but before he could respond, a new voice cut through the tension, filled with authority and unmistakable outrage. "What on earth is going on here?" All heads turned toward the entrance where Mr. Harrison, who had just arrived for his impromptu store check, stood in a tailored suit, his presence commanding the room. His salt and pepper hair framed a face lined with both age and wisdom. The man's eyes moved swiftly between Snoop, Ms. Sinclair, and the security guard, his expression darkening with every passing second. Sinclair's demeanor shifted instantly. "Mr. Harrison," she exclaimed, her tone suddenly deferential. I didn't expect to see you here today." "Clearly, Mr. Harrison," replied coldly, "and I certainly didn't expect to walk in and witness this." He gestured toward Snoop. "Would someone care to explain why this man is being treated like a criminal in my store?" Snoop's eyebrows raised slightly at the words, "my store," but he remained silent, watching the scene unfold. Miss Sinclair stumbled over her words. Well, you see, he was acting suspiciously, and I thought—" "You thought what, Mr. Harrison?" interrupted sharply. "That he didn't belong here? That he wasn't the type of customer you wanted?" His voice rose slightly, and the tension in the room thickened. "Do you have any idea who this man is, Mr. Sinclair blinked, clearly thrown off by the question. "No, This is Snoop Dogg, Mr. Harrison said, turning to Snoop with a nod of acknowledgement. "One of the most respected artists in the music industry and someone I personally admire. So again, I ask, what exactly was your issue with him?" "Ms." Sinclair's face turned ashen. She opened her mouth to respond, but seemed to realize no explanation would suffice. "I didn't know," she stammered. "No, you didn't, Mr. Harrison said, his voice icy, "because you didn't bother to find out. Instead, you jumped to conclusions based on nothing but your own bias." The manager's world was unraveling before her eyes, but the reckoning wasn't over yet. The boutique fell silent, save for the faint hum of traffic outside the large glass windows. "Mr. Harrison turned to the security guard, his voice steady but firm. "You can leave now. There's no situation here other than one of gross incompetence." The guard hesitated, then nodded silently and exited the store, leaving Mrs. Sinclair to face the fallout on her own. Snoop felt a mix of emotions, relief, gratitude, and a simmering frustration that hadn't yet found an outlet. "Mr. Harrison," he began, his voice calm, but weighted. "I appreciate you stepping in, but this isn't just about me. This is about how people like her," he gestured toward Mrs. Sinclair. "Treat others based on assumptions. Today it's me, tomorrow it's someone else." Mr. Harrison nodded solemnly. "You're absolutely right, Snoop." He turned back to Sinclair, his expression hardening. "Do you know what I stand for? What this store is supposed to stand for?" Miss Sinclair's lips quivered, but no words came. She glanced nervously at the other customers who were watching with rapt attention. "This boutique was founded to be a space of inclusion and elegance for everyone," Mr. Harrison continued. "I invested in it because I believed in that vision, but what you've done today is the exact opposite of what we represent. You've reduced this place to a stage for your prejudice." The words hit like a gavel, final and irrevocable. Miss Sinclair tried to interject, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean—" "Don't, Mr. Harrison interrupted sharply. "Don't insult my intelligence or Snoop's dignity by pretending this was anything but what it clearly was." The couple who had been browsing earlier whispered to each other, then left quietly, as if realizing they were witnesses to something far bigger than a shopping trip. The remaining customer, a woman still clutching a silk scarf, stood frozen, her expression a mix of shock and discomfort. Mr. Harrison stepped forward, his voice steady but piercing. "Effective immediately, you're relieved of your position. Your actions today are inexcusable, and I won't allow this store to be represented by someone who lacks basic respect for others." Miss Sinclair's eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Mr. Harrison, please. I've been here for 10 years. I didn't mean to—" "10 years. And this is how you treat people?" he interrupted, shaking his head. "That makes it even worse. Pack your things and leave. I'll have HR follow up with you tomorrow. Her face turned pale as the reality of the situation sank in. She glanced at Snoop, then back at Mr. Harrison before turning on her heel and retreating to the back of the store. The storm had passed, but what came next would leave everyone with something to think about. As the door to the back room closed behind the former manager, a heavy silence lingered in the boutique. Mr. Harrison exhaled deeply and turned his attention to Snoop. His expression softened, and for the first time since stepping into the confrontation, he looked genuinely apologetic. "Snoop," he said, his tone measured but sincere, "I can't erase what just happened, but I want you to know that this is not how I run my businesses. I deeply regret that you had to experience this here, of all places." Snoop nodded, his face calm but his voice steady. "Thank you for stepping in, but this isn't just about today. These moments happen far too often, and it's exhausting. I appreciate what you've done, but there's still work to be done here and beyond." Harrison nodded solemnly. "You're right. This incident is a wake-up call, and I intend to address it immediately. I'll start by ensuring my staff receives proper training on inclusivity and respect. This store and every business I own must be a space where everyone feels welcome." He gestured toward the jewelry counter. "Now let's make this right. Please choose something for your wife and don't worry about the cost. It's my way of saying I'm sorry for what happened here today." Snoop hesitated for a moment, his pride conflicting with his gratitude, but as he looked at Mr. Harrison, he saw genuine remorse in the man's eyes. "Thank you," Snoop said finally. "I appreciate the gesture." The other customers who had been watching the scene unfold now began to speak among themselves. One woman approached Snoop timidly. "I'm sorry for what you went through," she said, her voice soft but earnest. "It wasn't right." Snoop smiled faintly, nodding. "Thank you. It means a lot to hear that." The boutique felt different now, less tense, more open. The weight of the earlier confrontation was still there, but it was balanced by a growing sense of justice and resolution. Mr. Harrison walked to the counter and picked up the slender gold bracelet with the emerald that Snoop had admired earlier. "Is this the one you were looking at?" he asked. Snoop nodded. "It's perfect. She'll love it." "Good, Mr. Harrison said with a small smile. "Then it's yours?" As the transaction was completed, the remaining customer approached Mr. Harrison. "What you did today," she said, "was brave. I hope more people in your position start to take a stand like that." "Mr." Harrison nodded. "It's the least I could do, but bravery would have been addressing this before it ever reached this point. I have a lot to reflect on." While the bracelet found its way into Snoop's hands, the ripple effect of the day's events was only beginning to unfold. As Snoop exited the glamour boutique with the gold bracelet carefully tucked inside a sleek black box, the crisp air of Beverly Hills felt lighter, almost like a fresh start. He paused on the sidewalk for a moment, taking a deep breath to process everything that had transpired. It wasn't the gift he had planned on buying his wife that stuck with him, but the reminder of the uphill battle he and so many others still faced every day. Inside the store, Mr. Harrison wasn't done. He called his assistant, who quickly arrived, clipboard in hand. "Effective immediately," Mr. Harrison instructed. "I want a full staff meeting scheduled. Every employee in this store will undergo comprehensive bias training, and I want oversight on hiring practices moving forward. No excuses." The assistant nodded briskly, scribbling notes. "Understood, sir. And one more thing," Mr. Harrison added, his voice lowering but firm. "Make sure this story reaches the right ears. Not as a PR move, but as an example of why vigilance matters. This can't just fade away." As the assistant scurried off, the other employees exchanged nervous glances, knowing change was coming. Meanwhile, Snoop headed home. The weight of the day settled in his chest, but it didn't feel as suffocating as it might have before. He'd stood his ground. He'd seen justice served, at least in this instance, and though it didn't erase the pain of countless similar experiences, it was a step forward, a small victory in a much larger fight. That evening, as Snoop handed his wife the bracelet, her face lit up with joy. She held it to her wrist, admiring its delicate beauty. "It's perfect," she said, pulling him into a hug, but she could sense there was more to his expression than just the satisfaction of giving her a gift. Is everything okay? She asked. Snoop hesitated, then nodded. It will be, he replied. One day. Across town, Mr. Harrison sat in his office, replaying the events of the day in his mind. He thought of Snoop's calm defiance, Ms. Sinclair's thinly veiled prejudice, and the customers who had quietly slipped away rather than intervene. It wasn't enough to fix this one incident, he realized. He had a responsibility to do more. He picked up his phone and began drafting an open letter, one that acknowledged the systemic biases that allowed incidents like today to happen and committed to actionable change. It wasn't just about saving face. It was about ensuring that his businesses led by example. What started as a humiliating moment became a catalyst for reflection, accountability, and, hopefully, a better future. The next day, the Glamour Boutique made headlines, not for its luxurious offerings, but for the incident that had unfolded within its pristine walls. Mr. Harrison's open letter went viral, striking a chord with people across the country. In it, he detailed the events, condemned the discriminatory behavior, and outlined the steps his company would take to prevent such incidents in the future. The letter didn't sugarcoat anything. It was honest, raw, and unapologetic in its commitment to change. Snoop read the letter from his desk during his lunch break. It was a small but meaningful acknowledgement of what he and so many others had endured. For once, it felt like someone in a position of power wasn't just brushing things under the rug. The story sparked a larger conversation online and in communities. People shared their own experiences with discrimination in stores, workplaces, and everyday life. Some voices were angry, others hopeful, but all of them added to a collective reckoning. The Glamour Boutique wasn't just a store anymore. It was a symbol of the work still left to do. Snoop's wife wore the bracelet proudly, not just because of its beauty, but because of what it represented. It was a reminder that even in the face of humiliation and injustice, there were moments where dignity and accountability could prevail. As for Snoop, he didn't let the incident define him, but it strengthened his resolve to speak up when others couldn't. He knew there were still battles to fight, but he also knew that small victories like this one could ripple out and inspire change. For Mr. Harrison, the day marked a turning point. He didn't see himself as a hero, far from it, but he recognized that privilege came with responsibility, and he vowed to use his platform to create a space where everyone, regardless of their background, felt respected. Prejudice, whether overt or subtle, leaves scars, but standing up against it, even in small, everyday moments, can be a step toward a world where dignity and respect aren't privileges, but rights. It takes courage, accountability, and the willingness to learn from mistakes to drive real change. Stories like Snoop's remind us of the importance of speaking up and holding people accountable for their actions. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with others. Together, we can amplify voices that matter and pave the way for a more inclusive future. Subscribe for more stories that inspire reflection and action. Disclaimer: all stories shared on this channel are entirely fictional and created for entertainment purposes. We advocate for a world where everyone has equal rights under the law and where society continues to grow in fairness, development, and civilization. Our goal is to share heartwarming stories that contribute to making life better. Any resemblance to real events, individuals, or organizations is purely coincidental and unintentional. These stories are not meant to reference any actual people, events, or entities, and contain no political or religious connotations.